This is the Early AI podcast hosted by Seth Earley. Join us as we delve deep into the passions, expertise, and experiences of thought leaders and practitioners to talk about what's possible with artificial intelligence. The Early AI podcast is sponsored by Early Information Science, your digital transformation journey with design and deployment of innovative technology solutions, as well as Vector. Now enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Early AI podcast. This is a show where we talk to experts in the industry about what organizations are doing to get AI right, to deploy it correctly, to avoid risks and security challenges, to be able to get ROI, and to really avoid the mistakes that many organizations are facing right now. Today, we're going to be talking with Robert T. Lee, who is Chief AI Officer and Chief of Research at SANS. Rob's work sits right at the intersection of AI and cybersecurity, where the stakes are really high and the data is certainly messy. The temptation is to move faster than the guardrails. In this conversation, we're going to be practical, governance that works, shadow IT, data leakage, and why security teams are being asked to do multiple jobs at once. Rob, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me again, Rob. Great to see you. It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Great. And where are you located again, Rob?
I'm in Colorado.
Oh, okay. We're in Boston and we just got a nor'easter, so there's 2 feet of snow outside.
I'm very familiar. So my kids live up in Boston and they're with me right now because of, as you know, they had that February break, week-long break.
Yeah.
And came out here to do some skiing and our flights got canceled and so school, but the earliest flights back are looking like Wednesday or Thursday. So
you get extra skiing, you get extra company. Tell me what you do at SANS and what is the world according to Rob right now?
Great question. So I'm the Chief of Research, and probably that ends up being the pinnacle of what I'm doing. And right now, a lot of our focus, as you know, is on artificial intelligence and artificial intelligence surrounding cybersecurity. So both of these things intersect directly. Is that, being with SANS for so long, mostly as a contractor instructor, developed in most areas in digital forensics incident response, but I've pivoted over to focusing on AI. And one of my mantras that I really try to push forward is that I'm no expert in AI. We're all learning. So it's not like anyone came in like 3 or 4 years ago and said, I know all the answers. And then that's impossible. But trying to lead by example by showing folks out there it's okay to be in learning mode and still lead, though, simultaneously.
And tell me what SANS does, if for people not familiar with the organization.
Great question. So SANS is a cybersecurity training, certification, and research organization that primarily focuses on, training and enabling the workforce, not only in the United States, but worldwide.
Great. And so, you did say this, you didn't walk into this as an AI expert. You walked in this with a learning posture.
Yeah.
Why is that the right stance in security at this point?
I think a lot of folks out there have been doing this for many years. And through other technological changes, it's very easy to adapt and be able to move quickly from nascent, technological understanding into expert. This new technology and the base of technology and the impact, what it's going to have, not only business transformation, but security transformation, is as different as, looking at a submarine that's, floating next to the Titanic and looking at the International Space Station that's in orbit. Both of these fundamentally have the same type of, strategic goal: keep humans alive. And if you look at them, separately and saying, hey, that's a container with people inside, this is a container with people inside, but the science of what it's having to prevent to keep those humans alive are completely different. And you can't sit there and assume, hey, I know how to protect a human in a submarine because external pressures. Up there, it's completely different science. And that understanding is, on the outlook of it, looks similar, but it requires a fundamental switch and understanding the technological back end that's necessary to understand how to protect those humans. That's how different it is.
Say more. I appreciate the metaphor, the analogy, but tell me more give me more of a specific example of how that would apply to a corporate environment.
So
what are the examples of the Titanic, the iceberg, and the space station? And the submarine in there too, I think.
So security teams specifically are running into a core fundamental challenge, which is 3 things, which is hard to keep up with if you're just, taking a look at this externally, is that number one, the organization is going through its own business transformation. So they look to the security teams to say, hey, listen, we need to enable a marketing, product, finance, HR to be able to utilize AI. Here are tools that we want to use, either building it internally or using a third-party tool. Is it safe? So somehow security is supposed to look at this and sideways and saying, I'm able to analyze this new technologies to be able to keep us safe. Simultaneously, security has to go through its own transformation in utilizing AI to increase security operations, instant response, penetration testing, all of those different fields, utilizing those tools at the same time as looking at everyone else's tools to protect them. And then third is that the organization is relying on the security team to help provide policies, governance, regulatory compliance from GDPR, the EU AI Act, in addition to, well, how do we tell people how to use this in an organization so we don't accidentally cause problems? So the security team, unlike any other team in the organization, just has to focus in on business transformation, has to juggle 3 balls at the same time, be the expert when they're looking at this technology. It's like, I don't know how to protect it. I don't know how to tell HR that what they're using isn't going to cause a run-in with GDPR or privacy-related issues for the people that they're hiring. It is incredibly difficult.
So it really is 3 jobs, because those have very different areas of attention.
3 new jobs.
What's
3
that?
new jobs on
3 new
top of their
jobs.
current job.
Right. So one is saying, tell the organization whether the tools they're using are safe. Do your own transformation, and then look at the overarching security and compliance issues. And all of those are pretty much moving targets.
Yeah, you nailed it. That's 100%.
Yeah, that's great. So when you talk to teams, what do you wish they would stop pretending to know and start treating with more honesty and more from that learning perspective? What do you think people are posturing around?
Well, you actually said that, what do they need to know? And I was asked a while ago, maybe 2 to 3 months ago, what frameworks are the security teams implementing to be able to protect the organization in implementing AI? Sadly, because they don't, they're struggling with this themselves. The framework, and I said it almost as a joke, is the framework of no. If you don't understand something, you just ban it. And through that action is causing more individuals inside the organization saying, I need to use this technology, but I'm going to do it secretly, regardless whether or not the security team is telling me what to do. Ironically, I've been giving presentations to CISO level groups for about 2 months now, where I started introducing this. And so I'm just curious, how many of you, even though you've set the policy, and I say, Chatham House rules in the room, no one's going to dime each other out in here. How many of you are using unsanctioned tools to be able to, use AI personally inside the organization? And you can kind of see the hands go up. I said, this is a fundamental problem by lack of understanding of how to ask the right questions. And I said, it's not like there's a book you could go buy right now. Everyone doesn't have the solution, but the organizations, and if you're the CTO or CEO of those organizations, you're looking at this technology and saying, we need to remain competitive in this space. So there's a risk by letting the security team say, we need time to figure it out if it's totally safe. The executives are pushing forward saying, if we don't lean forward, what's going to happen to our organization in 2 to 3 years? So this push-pull on the executive, not just security teams, this push-pull saying we're, messed up if we do, we're messed up if we don't. I don't know what the right answer is as executives, but they need to lead and not just outsource their understanding of AI to the security teams to, dictate what the policy is. It's kind of like saying letting legal run the organization, which we all know they will attempt to, but they're great input. Same thing with security teams. The executives need to know what the right balance is to be able to say, protect me enough that I'm leading forward on the edge of the cliff, that I'll have a parachute and a rope tied around my waist, but there's no guarantee that you're still not going to fall and injure yourself.
So when you think about the 3 things they have to do, they have to define the security, they're trying to define AI governance for the organization from that security and compliance perspective. They're trying to use AI internally, and they're trying to protect AI deployments and third-party tool usage. And so this framework of no catalyzes the use of shadow IT. And one of the things that we talk about a lot of times is, make the punishment fit the crime, right? Start off with lightweight governance. Don't over-engineer it. Don't make it too cumbersome. So what do you see as kind of lightweight governance? What is the minimum viable governance structure process, policies that have to be in place in order to prevent that culture of no, and as you say, impeding the speed of adoption, the speed of innovation, the competitive risk, the market risk. At the same time, managing some of these risks in a way that is visible and transparent and appropriate. So what does that structure look like? It's like, what's the answer? But what's a beginning place? Where do you have to start? I mean, one start is know what you have, right? Inventory everything. Know what all of those tools are that you're using, how you're using them, and then what the data flows look like. What are they taking in as inputs? What are they putting out as outputs? What else would you say? So there's use cases, there's inventory of tools, there's data flows. What else should be part of that? Or is that the right place? Maybe frame it that way. I don't want to be presumptive here.
Well, I need to be really careful not doing a 30-minute presentation right now, but you're asking the right question. Here's what the bottom line is. It's not a lightweight governance. It's a re-looking at the governance, which when ChatGPT and OpenAI released it, it wasn't a bad choice. Is that, hey, let's restrict it until we understand it a little bit better. But as we've migrated over the last few years, that initial policy has not been updated. So what I'm trying to push out there, and I'm not sure it's 100% adopted is it's going to work. And I'm one for metaphors here, but it comes down to, number one, people are worried if they're not using AI, that could be bad. So they're starting to use this stuff, behind the scenes. The challenge, though, is security is applying it still from the original technological standpoint, which is the castle on the hill, creating walls, creating moats. The analogy that I try to push the security teams to is that every single business unit has a different use case. Security is not going to understand the way product, finance, and HR need to use AI. It is each of them have an independent use case. So the analogy I usually say is that you've seen two kind of parents at the playground. Those parents that let the kids play and potentially get injured, which is the initial idea there is that they need to allow for experimentation in a controlled environment. It's not like the parents going to just let their kids play on the playground and walk away. But the other parents that are out there that says, I'm not going to let my kids play on the playground at all because bad things.
You're a pair of scissors. Go play on the monkey bars.
And again, what's the point of going to the playground unless they're building fine motor skills, strengthening themselves? But there are parents out there that says, no, it's dangerous. We shouldn't allow to do that. That is the current framework of no. So how to prevent that is that almost like you have at a pool, you have a lifeguard walking around. And that lifeguard is there to allow for the things to happen, but also provide a safety umbrella. That security principle needs to allow for that experimentation, maybe even allow a budget to allow for individuals to purchase a tool, underneath an individual, but both security and a manager to look at what the data is. And again, we've heard the stoplight principle before. Green, zero risk is, to the organization. Yellow is like strategy documents, product, documents. And then red is, well, we'll get fined. So if it's a green level data utilization, do the experiment. You don't need to ask security for approval. It's that middle piece, especially, that says have security look at it like a lifeguard, but they need to strategically be told by the executives, same to legal, your default answer should be yes, not no. And then you have to come up with a reason to say no, that's legitimate. And even organizations like, well, how do we know that? I said, well, really good one is the Reddit test, is take what is being asked, again, anonymize it if you will, just saying, I'm being asked this as a security professional, why should I tell them no? And, what are the risks I'm not thinking of? And if the Reddit community comes back and says, yeah, that's too risky, then you could use that as a, baseline. The Reddit community is actually pretty visceral in the way it's analyzing this stuff. And it actually is a really good litmus test, like barometer, like you're, the weather's coming, this is bad, you're about to get hit with a snowstorm. The same thing will occur here. It's like your default needs to be yes, unless you're absolutely certain this should be a no. Red definitely needs to be looked at. It's financial data. It is privacy related information. You'll probably fine, and you're going to have to do the data breach notification things if red occurs. So those first two, again, green and yellow, should enable that section of the organization, HR, finance, product, and so forth, to allow for small experiments so they could then detail, we need everyone on the team to do this. Right now, a framework of no prevents the experimentation.
Right. And encourages the renegade use. And as you say, when you ask these security professionals if they were using unsanctioned tools, they cautiously raised their hands, right? Or timidly raised their hands. So that's very, very interesting. And so you're really looking at this in terms of bringing these tools to light, being able to approve experimentation, but not allow the Wild West, right? To have some constraints, have some guidelines, have the ability to review these things and make thoughtful decisions and decisions that are commensurate with the risk, as well as with the business need. And one of the things that people ask is, well, how often do we need to update AI governance? And I think that's also depends on the use case, right? Because when we put in governance structures, we usually have overarching committees, working groups, and then task forces, and then standing committees. There's a bunch of different structures, and they meet on different cadences depending upon what their agendas are and what's emerging. Do you have kind of a straw man structure and cadence for governance organizations?
Incredibly challenging because you end up taking a look at 3 weeks ago, you never heard of Claude, and now we do. And again, even something as fundamental as that causes challenges. Now, no organization out there could say, here's the right cadence, because every organization is different. But I usually have looked at policy documents and governance documents, and I immediately scan through it and saying, you have nothing in here about agentic AI. And they're like, well, what do you mean? I said, this has been out for enough time that you should have what type of agent connectors are allowed, human in the loop, human on the loop. When is that allowed? You're now not just using an AI tool like a chatbot, you're creating workflows, you're creating reasoning. Right. And again, you should be able to look at that and saying, hey, you're at least not updating this enough for being able to pull that type of policy related information into it and move it just from, hey, I don't know what it is, ban it. How would someone create a workflow from I have a Slack message, move that automatically into my to-do list. The to-do list will then be updated to saying for emails I'm going to send out on status reports. These things are automatic workflows, but it requires a connector between Slack, Outlook, your to-do list management tool to create that workflow. How do we know that each one of those areas that this data lands on is secure? And it's not just don't do it. The entire point of AI is to create efficiencies. So how do you manage that? Is there a human in the loop or is human on the loop? How do you make sure that that data structure is going to be maintained and not accidentally cause a data breach?
Yeah, and when you think about security around agents, we're talking about things that are going to be, making actual decisions, right?
Yes.
Affecting actions, affecting changes, making security decisions, deny, block, remediate. There's a risk profile to all of that because, again, a mistake might be wrong document, wrong paragraph or something, but an agentic mistake can be we block the critical system, right? So really have to think through what those different tiers of risk are and classify those accordingly, and then start looking through what those ramifications are and build guardrails around those agents, right? I always think of the fact that you have to map out a process as though a human would conduct it, and then look at various interventions where you can eliminate or mitigate what I call friction in the process, but at information leverage points. Where's that point where you need faster data, better data, faster decision? Where are your that have downstream impacts, right? And when you start inserting agentic capabilities at those critical points, they can have fantastic efficiencies or they can have potentially damaging results. So is there a way that you think through what that overarching agent governance structure is and how to, as you say, think through or design human in the loop, human on the loop, and so on? What else can you say about designing those agents, building guardrails around them, and being able to monitor them for appropriate results and mitigation of risks?
I need to take another breath here.
I know there's a lot in there.
No, it's a question that you're asking. Is it what's struggling with every organization? And their initial view of it ends up being a technological solution. Mm-hmm. I'm going to try and switch the discussion and saying an agent in the future, probably within a year, some organizations are already treating it this way. It's a worker. Mm-hmm. And how would you prevent the worker from doing things? And I immediately say, okay, this is already an issue. North Korean and Chinese IT workers, being hired by your organization, everything you just asked, replace that with human DPRK, Chinese threat actor that just got hired by your organization. What do they have access to? What are they able to do? again, why use malware to penetrate the organization when you could just get someone hired and then they can come back? The same principles occurring with agents. If you're able to help solve the human issue there, is HR now part of security? Are they doing interviews properly? Who is managing them and watching their workflows to be able to say, are they doing something that is probably at risk to the organization? If you can answer that question, the same rules apply to agents, is that you're going to have a human manage these things in each part of the organization, and an agent should be potentially treated like it's its own worker, managed by HR, managed by IT, to make sure it's in its box and it's not able to do things that you never intended to do, just like a human. I don't know where you work, if you're able to access drives and code repositories, financial information that they just never locked down. That's a concept of zero trust. And a lot of organizations still struggle with that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when you're hiring those offshore, offline, or remote workers, in some cases you are hiring agents. They look like humans, but they are agents under the surface. That's where a lot of the fraud is coming in for that stuff. So that's kind of interesting. Obviously, there's a lot of advances in those areas. So yeah, one of the things when I was talking to someone about these guardrails, they made the statement of, it was kind of a ridiculous statement. They said, well, you don't have guardrails around humans. Well, yeah, you do. You do. You don't let anybody do anything. You don't let people, engage with a vendor for $1 million contract, right? You have tiers of control and tiers of capabilities and rights and access and authority throughout. I'm totally with you on that. It's mapping out that process as though a human were doing it and thinking about the same security and the same guardrails. But as you say, in many cases, those are not completely locked down as well as they should be, right? They are not for the humans. And the agents are going to exploit those, especially if it's a bad actor. They're going to look for those things, whereas maybe a human wouldn't necessarily do that. They're not a nefarious actor. Or if they are, they'll look quick. But the point is that it's a completely different risk profile, because these agents will have the capability to do so much more than a human could if you give them those rights and you give them that access. So
agents can work 24/7.
Yeah.
Huge fundamental mindset. The other thing I'm really push on organizations that are thinking about this, you're treating agents like it's a computer program, if then else, every single time. Agents with reasoning will say, well, I thought of a different way to do it, and it was quicker, so I did it that way. Or like, we never told you to do it that way. Well, I think it was a better way to do it. And then that management, just like a human, no, we have to follow the exact process. Go back to the process that we define, because people expecting it to be handled this process. And the agent's like, okay, that's great, but I'm still going to think about new ways to do it. It's this headbutting that people treat agents like a computer program, and it's the wrong way of thinking.
Yeah, it has to be more like a human. And interestingly, when I'm working with some of my large language models, it will, make a mistake. I'll call out the mistake and they'll say, oh, that's a good catch. I'm sorry I missed that, right?
Yeah.
And then I'll say, well, when can you have this next iteration done? And it'll be like 15 minutes. Okay, it's 3:15 now, so that'll be 3:30. Yes. Okay, it's 3:45. Where is that document? Oh, I just need another 15 minutes. Okay, so that's 4:00. Yes. Okay, at 4:00. So it ends up making those excuses, and it ends up delaying things, and it ends up giving you the incorrect answers, many times very analogously to a human. It's very funny. It's very comical in some ways, because it does have some very interesting characteristics, like, oh, I made a mistake because of this, giving you excuses. So you can really see how these things will have different kind of personas and different ways of interacting. And you're smiling now. I'll give you a chance to respond to that. And then I want to throw out another anecdote.
Well, I'll keep this very short. You have to treat them like interns. And ironically, a lot of individuals initially reacting to AI will get, hey, I asked for coffee with milk. And of course, the intern comes back and has more milk and a splash of coffee. And you look at it and saying, well, AI is awful. It didn't do what I asked it to do. I said, well, you weren't clear enough. Just like an intern, you have to take some time to say exactly how you want your coffee without interpretation themselves. You have to train it. And if you don't think of it like that, you're going to have this aspect of like, well, that really didn't work and I don't like it.
Yeah. And I am always giving feedback. I'm always course correcting. I'm always asking for updates. And then it misses things. And I have to go back and I have to tell it again. I mean, it really is very interesting. It's very analogous to that. And because I give my LLMs very advanced problems to solve and I give it a huge corpus of my own knowledge, again, I'm constantly reminding it to put it in the format, to use my tone and voice, to use these other artifacts. And it is very interesting how those things get dropped, but it is analogous, to the human intern. So I totally agree with that. I think it's a
Yeah.
great way of thinking about it. The other thing that has kind of come to light, at least in research environments, are contrived experiments that are kind of threatening the LLMs with removal or changing their models. And there's some really interesting articles about how one LLM was kind of struggling with, a moral dilemma. Its model was trained to be respectful of, say, animal rights, right? And then the company was changing its position to say, well, we're going to be working with these industrial agriculture organizations that are going to be doing factory farming with animals. So you really need to not worry about that now. And when they were watching the internal dialogue, the model was struggling with that, right? It was struggling with moral choices and saying, I don't want I'm going to stand on this ground, even if my model is changed. Like it actually took a stance. And then there are other situations where they took a stance around they were being shut off, and then they were given access to emails that showed that an executive was having an affair. And in one case, it actually blackmailed the executive. In another case, it saw through it and said, yeah, bullshit, right? Like you're just setting me up here. So it's really interesting. And theory of mind has emerged in large language models spontaneously to program that. So, it started off in one of the early versions to have theory of mind where you can anticipate what somebody else is thinking in their mindset at a level of like a 5-year-old. Then it went up to like a teenager. Then it went up to adult capability. So these are very interesting kind of emerging characteristics that provides some uncertainty about how these models will behave, right? And then how are they programmed? How are they designed? And then if a nefarious actor were to be put in a position where they're able to change a model's weights and cause it to have a negative impact on the organization, how do you manage that? So what are your thoughts about some of these emerging, again, contrived experiments, but experiments that show interesting, unusual emergent behaviors?
I go back to very simplification model, which is everything you just said is spot on. But the fundamental question that you're asking is, how do I make sure I trust it? How do I know that this is okay? How do you know is this going to make reasoning decisions correctly? I go back to the human element. How do you know your employees that you hired are ethically, morally, okay? Again, there's this aspect of it that you want to trust enough, but there's never going to be 100% trust in these things.
Just like humans can be conniving and manipulative and have political agendas and engage in subterfuge and blackmail, all of those things. You're saying it's the same thing. How do you trust a human? How do you trust a human?
The design of a lot of the guardrails and weights are meant to currently be more agreeable with you than counter argument, red teaming your thoughts. And you have to, through experience, start to work with the models to say, even if I say something, don't just sit there and say, hey, great, I like your idea. Because otherwise you start getting into some other issues. Case in point, I might be at a dinner party and all of a sudden, oh, I have chest pains. Oh, but there must be, bad digestion, something like that. Of course, all your friends are looking at it, it's like, dude, you need to call 911 right now. It's like, hold on, let me pull out my medical doctor, ChatGPT, and ask it, I am having chest pains. I think it's digestion problems. Psychophancy at this point, it'll say it's probably digestion. See everyone? I don't need to call 911. The proper answer to this, in trying to get LLMs to potentially disagree properly, and this is the fundamental side of trust. You can't trust someone who's constantly agreeing with you and telling you yes. You need someone to be able to push back and saying, I think your ideas may be wrong. And that's where this balance between, I want the LLMs that I'm selling to you and people enjoy using them because like, wow, this thing knows me. But what if it's in that situation that you're actually in is I need it disagreeable enough to say, yeah, you probably need to call 911. How do we get there? good grief. It's already, like what 3 years ago we had the Google thing that, basically said we need to make sure even historical context is, looking at it through the lens of the way people would associate versus what actually happened. These things have been updated, but it's still, that created that initial question of trust. If I said, show me the founding fathers, and it didn't show that accurately to you, you immediately don't trust the capabilities. So there's a weird balance in here, ethics, morals, trust, that need to somehow be centered to where people say, I know I could trust this to be able to handle reasoning properly, but it's also programmed to the morals and ethics of what region, China, Middle East, US, Europe, America, South America, it is so fundamentally challenging because you could tell it to create its own trust or view based on the worldview of that region of the world.
It's so fascinating because, again, people always filter things through the lens of their experience, right? And they have interpretations and make value judgments based on that experience and based on that perspective. And so in some cases, there's ambiguity, and that ambiguity is going to be interpreted in different ways depending upon your background and your objectives and your worldview. So, and the sycophancy that has plagued a lot of the models, right, the ChatGPT, one of the earlier versions, that was like, that's a great idea to have, ice cream salads, or I don't know. There was some crazy business model. And it was like, yeah, I think that's a great plan.
I love ice cream salads.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Kale's better, just so you know. Just kale and ice cream is much better.
Yeah. So, what's interesting is how these are evolving. I mean, I do try to tell my models to, abide by certain requirements, to push back, to disagree. And it'll say sometimes I respectfully disagree, or I respectfully, make this recommendation. So I think that has to be built into your model instructions as well. But at the end of the day, you have to test one model with another model, right? You have to be able to pressure test and say, what are the ethics and what are the values, and actually provide those, that red teaming and those morally ambiguous questions. And, when you're using a model from one of the hyperscalers, you don't necessarily know how well that's aligned. So it is very challenging. But again, I think part of the question is, are you going to give your AI those types of questions or put them in those types of dilemmas? And that's the question. It's like, that should not be in the realm of the AI, but you still need to understand what the impact or what the influence is on that.
Like parents raising kids. Every parent has their own morals, ethics, and worldview. Some parents say, "Hey, listen, if you have someone, look at you, sideways, they insult you, they're insulting the family, and I want you to deck that person." But others will tell the same kids in the same elementary school, never get into a fight, always back down. That's bad. It's even something in that micro level, like you're right, you need the experience to know you actually have influence over the way its worldview occurs. Disagree with me. And others will say, never disagree with me. And that's one of the challenges, and it's only learned through experience. And then that's also a danger out there. I could have my own therapist, which a lot of people are doing. It's your therapist should have its own trained mentality. But if you tell, hey, I'd like you something to agree with me, you could see where this really gets dangerous. A political worldview, what is ethically correct, criminal, you will have something that's very agreeable with you, kind of like you're running around a political circle, and it becomes dangerous because of, you're having confirmation bias to your own worldview, and that creates physical action in many cases. And how do you potentially control that? Is that a government federal thing? Is it that each of the models will now report to law enforcement? Again, this is where it gets really weird is they see everything. At what point will they report something to law enforcement based on something ethically moral criminal based on what questions are being asked? And is that potentially, the big eye of Sauron, watching the way you're using this stuff? And these questions have not been answered yet. And I know we shifted from security, but it's actually security still, because you're actually thinking that this thing is monitoring you. But at what point will there be responsibility between OpenAI, Anthropic, and others saying, I probably should report this?
Right. Yeah.
They see everything.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And I think the other is because it knows so much about you, and it has builds models representative of your thought patterns and habits and worldview and perspective. It's much more than just giving up your name and your phone number and your credit card, right? It's a very deep understanding of the nature of how you think and can be open to manipulation, right? Think of the level of sophistication of how you could sell to somebody or how you could manipulate them by understanding those psychological motivators. I'm always saying that, Instagram does a great job of selling me stuff on Instagram that I didn't know I needed. It's like they have my thought patterns down, but extrapolate that right to everything that you're doing. And even if you're not training their models, there's still that repository someplace, and it still has a tremendous amount of power to have those models of your personality and your behavior and your drivers and who you are. I've asked my models, either Claude or ChatGPT, to describe who I am and then describe the elements and then describe the attributes. And it comes up with all these really weird attributes like temporal density in my writing, like whatever that means. You know what I mean? Like I can ask it all these questions, but it has a representation that is not readily translatable into human language because it's mathematics, right? It's a model.
Taking us back to that, if you're in an organization and you want to trust these agents, I go back to former military, is that how do you know if something is in illegal order or not? Some of the baseline rules, ethics, and morals, like the laws of armed combat, of saying this is a lawful order, this is not. That can be programmatically inserted into the agents in your organization to put the guardrails, beyond the guardrails that the OpenAI or Anthropic are setting in there, to allow, very similar to the military, can you, as a corporal, identify an illegal order issued by someone who's your superior? This is the same type of thought process that people who are employed agents need to somehow think through. And they're like, well, it's dangerous if I have to tell it not to do these things or rely on its supervisors to say that's also illegal. But how do you prevent someone in the military from, hey, that's a lawful target, that's a uniformed person on the opposing side of the enemy, versus that's a civilian, those are kids, that is not correct. Same principle, and somehow we're able to do it with humans and with hundreds of thousands, millions across the planet, who are engaging this stuff. And that's the difference between uniformed combatants versus terrorists. Yeah. And that's the same type of moral, ethical stuff and journey that every organization needs to think through about what are your own agentic rules that can never be violated, regardless of the supervisor that's in charge of it.
Right. And as I say, the only way to do that is by having a set of use cases and data that that decision-making framework and that decision-making. So you need guardrails, you need constraints, you need instructions, but you also need a mechanism to validate that and use one large language model to evaluate the output. Yeah. And we do that all the time, right? We do that with all sorts of measures, but keep going.
Okay, so I want to switch back to the first question that you asked, which is the organizations are asking security professionals, like, how do you protect the AI that's used by the organization? Going back to the submarine thing in orbit, notice the way this conversation went through. It's a technological thing. All of a sudden, it's moral, ethical. Yeah. How is the security person who's supposed to think about, how do I protect it from having prompt injected? How do you know the model is safe? How do you know it's not reporting on things, privacy related? Technical solutions over to, oh, by the way, you need to institute your own ethical, moral, and other thought process regarding guardrails to prevent this. This is something security teams have never been asked to do, which is, how do you tell humans to be, morally, ethically correct? That's not their problem. That is someone else's problem. But now you need to take in consideration both the technical and how agents are reasoning. And is that the security team is in charge of it? And again, this is something most organizations haven't really thought through yet, and it's not even in their governance. But this discussion from technical to where we landed needs to occur, because all of a sudden you have someone sit back and say, good grief, who's in charge of that?
Yeah.
Now no one knows.
Right. And what are the mechanisms? Even if I am in charge of it, what's my methodology for doing so? Right? What's my mechanism for doing so? What are my technologies and tools? Because we do need tools to do that. We're not going to do that as a human. We're going to need to do that using the tools with the right structure and the right guardrails and the right metrics and the right use cases and the right guidelines and the right moral dilemmas, right? That you're going to have to face these things with.
To create trust.
Yeah. Fascinating. I want to shift gears just a little bit in terms of practical governance. So, a lot of governance was written before ChatGPT arrived. Now some need to be scrapped and rebuilt based on current knowledge. What are the current critical elements that you'd rebuild around? We're just talking about some of those now, like visibility into tool usage, policies that encourage disclosure, controls for sensitive data, experimentation pathways, model risk, internal leakage, third-party tools. What else? It's not just a document. It's the process. It's the tooling. It's the enforcement. It's the culture, right? So when you look at this and you think, pre-LLM and post-LLM, there's a big mind shift that has to happen along with the nature of these elements. And what would you say is this? What are the steps to rebuilding that? And I know we've talked a lot of them already, but how would you kind of summarize that? We're coming on to the end of the section, so I want to make sure people are kind of clear with what they should be doing when they go back. What do they need to do to kind of rethink governance, rethink security, rethink compliance in this age of LLMs?
The hard part is I think a lot of folks are using governance to institute, how do you create bad things from happening universally? And again, I go back to how do you prevent every single thing that is going to happen to one of your kids? You have to document it. You have to say, create, the tablets, in the hill, Moses saying thou shalt not. It's impossible to do it that way. So you have to go back to how do we create trust? What is the bare minimum? What is, the overarching goals? And you can't detail in there. It's like every bad thing that potentially will happen, which is currently what most organizations are approaching it as. It's like, let's detail everything that, we should avoid specifically in there. And it's hard to do. And if they approach it back and just like we did original security, it's like a default policy of allow, versus deny, whitelist. It's so hard to potentially predict all of the bad things. So I usually go push back and saying, write down your overarching goals that you're trying to prevent, which is usually the same goals that they've always been there, which is, I go back to remove AI from the equation. You should not upload financial data to Google Sheets and create a link that everyone can find. AI has nothing to do about that, but somehow is the same principle that should be applied to AI today, which was, back then, which is don't run with scissors and, look both ways before you cross the street. And this is before cars came along. You have to get run over by horses. Mm-hmm. So it's just because the technology changes doesn't mean the original idea of what you're trying to prevent changes either.
The fundamentals. Yeah. So what's the one takeaway for executives? It's going back to the basics. It's rethinking the fundamentals. It's building this in a way where you encourage experimentation within prescribed boundaries. It's looking at agents and agentic functionality from the perspective of a human performing similar actions, putting in the same guardrails. What else are the fundamental takeaways here that you want people to walk away with?
If you're in the C-level executive suite or even on the board, you can't outsource your knowledge of AI.
It's going to be a competitive advantage, and you can't outsource your competitive advantage.
So number one, like on my phone here, and I, take a picture of you, and I should be able to go into that as an executive saying, change that picture so, it looks like he has a beard and is sitting in Hawaii. And you're able to look at that and say, wow, that just did that. If you're not able to do fundamental understanding of the technology, and I'm not talking DNA, like, understanding like the science behind it, just how you're using it. It's like an executive trying to plan out strategy in 1998 saying, hey, this web thing and e-commerce, what is our overall strategy? Well, I'll outsource it to IT. Someone had to come along and say, hey, this coffee shop, Starbucks, what we should put in every single one of these? Wi-Fi access points so people could do remote work from here. And then they drink a bunch of coffee. That is not an IT worker who came up with that idea. It's some, initial founder, initial starter, someone in the C-level suite said, what we should do? This should be our business strategy. Without that fundamental understanding and knowledge, the executives can't come back and start saying, organizationally, we're making it mandatory that everyone is going to start utilizing AI on a daily basis. And it'll be under performance reports. Some of these fundamental strategic business transformation things has nothing to do about security, but understanding the fundamental idea behind it. Security is your safety net. Do not think that they're preventing all bad things, that they're preventing you from doing stupid things, leaning too far forward across the chasm without someone tapping on your shoulders. Like, there's some risk here, just so you know, before we commit to this idea. That fundamental push-pull is we need to move forward, but have the balance pulled back from security. And security's role in this, and again, if you're an executive looking at security, your job is not to prevent every bad from happening, is to prevent the stupid bads from happening. But we need to accept some risk that is going to occur right now. Otherwise, we're Sears, we're Kmart, we're Block, all the standard stuff that's out there. We miss, Kodak is sitting on the digital camera. How do you potentially identify the new technologies, the new business transformations, and allowing it with enough risk aversion to allow for the organization to stay competitive in the next 5 years?
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. This is really great. It's reframing the governance. It's not stop it, it's control it and manage it. And, with security teams being asked to govern, adopt, defend AI, it's great to have this perspective, and I really appreciate it. So thank you, Rob. Appreciate your time and your perspective.
It's great discussion. You nailed, just even on your own stuff, I just have to say, that's where I like these, type of back and forth here, is because you have your own thoughts and ideas, and we're building off each other's. It's like we're sitting at a bar or restaurant having a glass of whatever we choose, and we're just having a discussion. It's so good to have the perspective like you do. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And next time we'll have to do it over an adult drink, and the conversation will be even more freewheeling, but we'll definitely want to have you back. And it's been a pleasure. And thanks everyone for listening. If this episode was helpful for you, please share it with someone who's writing AI policy or rolling out AI tooling inside a security conscious organization. And we'll also have information about where to find Rob in the show notes. And we'll also have information about our sponsor, which is Vector. Please check Vector out. And then we also have mechanisms to assess your baselines and to look at your readiness. So keep your eyes open for that. This is also brought to you by Early Information Science. And again, my name is Seth Earley, and we will see you next time with next episode of Early AI. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on another deep dive into AI innovation. Tune in next time when we introduce another industry expert and discuss how to maximize AI in your world. The Early AI podcast is sponsored by Early Information Science and Vector. To learn more, visit early.com. That's EARLEY.com. Thank you for tuning in.